It started with a $500 cabin and a dog that wouldn't stop barking. What Tom Harris dug up that winter didn't just change his life. It changed everything he thought he knew about guilt, forgiveness, and the hand of God working through a loyal heart. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Chapter 1. The 500 Land and the Forgotten Cabin. The wind that morning carried the scent of pine and melting snow, whispering through the endless Idaho forest as if it knew secrets it wasn't supposed to tell. Tom Harris eased his old blue pickup truck down the dirt road, the tires crunching over frost-hardened mud. At 60, he moved slower than he used to, but there was still a quiet strength in the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, calloused, sun-spotted, the hands of a man who had worked his whole life and lost more than he ever planned to. His gray hair was cropped short beneath a faded baseball cap, and his beard, streaked white and silver, gave him the look of someone who had stopped fighting time a long while ago. He was a man molded by wind and work, and though his back ached and his knees complained, his eyes still carried the blue steadiness of someone who refused to quit. Beside him sat Buddy, a German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and eyes the color of whiskey. Old eyes, sharp but gentle. 10 years old, with a graying muzzle and a calm dignity, Buddy had been with Tom since the day his wife passed away from cancer. The dog had watched over Tom through every lonely night since, as if he understood that some wounds could only be guarded, not healed. The forest road opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was, the cabin. It leaned against the slope like an exhausted traveler. The wood was gray and splintered from decades of rain, its roof sagging under a patchwork of rusted tin. A single brick chimney leaned slightly to the left, like a bent old man refusing to fall. Behind the house, the tall pines loomed close, their shadows draping over the clearing like dark curtains. Tom turned off the engine. Silence rushed in, thick and absolute. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. "Home," he murmured, though the word felt heavy, uncertain. He stepped out of the truck, his boots sinking slightly into damp soil. Buddy jumped down after him, stretching, shaking his fur. The dog sniffed the air, then lowered his head and growled softly. "What is it, boy?" Buddy didn't answer, of course, but his body stiffened, his gaze fixed toward the back of the property, where a mound of dirt and weeds rose unevenly like a scar in the earth. Tom followed the dog's stare. It was barely visible beneath fallen branches, but he could see the outline of what might once have been a stone well, its circular rim buried under years of neglect. A chill ran down his back. He told himself it was just the cold. A pickup truck rumbled into the clearing behind him, startling a raven from a nearby pine. The sound broke the silence. A woman stepped out, tall, mid-40s, wearing a tan wool coat and jeans tucked into boots. Her name was Sarah Dorsey, the real estate agent who had sold him the land. She had sharp cheekbones and auburn hair pinned in a loose bun. There was a briskness in her movements, a woman who didn't waste time or words. "Mr. Harris," she greeted, her voice cool but polite, "you made it all the way out here." "Wasn't hard," Tom said, "just long." She handed him a manila envelope, the deed, freshly signed. Her gloved fingers lingered a moment before she let go. "You sure about this place?" she asked, her tone lowering, uncertain. "No refunds once it's yours." Tom smiled faintly. "You sound like you're trying to talk me out of it." Sarah hesitated, then looked toward the forest. "People say strange things happen here. The Carters, the last family who lived here, disappeared after the flood in '55. They found the house still standing, but the family, gone." Tom chuckled, though not mockingly. "You really believe in that sort of thing?" Sarah folded her arms. "I believe in what I see, Mr. Harris, and I've seen buyers walk away from this place without taking a penny back. You're the first one who didn't flinch when I said 500. 500's still 500, Tom said with a shrug. "Cheaper than rent in Boise." Her lips pressed into a line. "Just be careful, okay? This land doesn't forget." Then she turned, got back in her truck, and drove off. Tom watched until her taillights disappeared between the trees. The quiet returned, heavier this time. Buddy barked once, sharp and urgent. "All right, let's have a look," Tom muttered, forcing cheer into his voice. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust. A pot-bellied stove sat cold in the corner, and a rocking chair leaned near the window, its seat split clean down the middle. On the mantel, Tom noticed something odd. A photograph, yellowed and curled with age. He picked it up. It showed a man, a woman, and two small children standing in front of the same cabin, smiling as if the world was simple then. Someone had written in fading ink, "The Carter Family, Summer 1954. Tom felt a pang. Nostalgia, maybe, or something lonelier. He set the photo down and turned to see Buddy standing in the doorway, ears pricked, eyes alert. "What now, boy?" Buddy's tail hung stiff. He growled low, deep in his chest, staring toward the back of the cabin again, toward that buried well. Tom sighed. "You really don't like that spot, do you?" The dog didn't move. The sky dimmed early. A storm was rolling in. Tom built a small fire and heated a can of stew, the scent filling the room with something like comfort. But even as he ate, he couldn't shake the feeling that the air outside was listening. Every creak of the cabin made him glance toward the door. Later that night, as wind hissed through the pines, Buddy started barking, furious, panicked. Tom grabbed his flashlight and ran outside. The beam cut through mist and darkness. Buddy stood at the edge of the clearing, paws dug into the soil, barking at the overgrown mound that had once been the well. "Buddy, enough!" The dog ignored him. He was digging now, dirt flying between his legs, growling as if something beneath the ground was growling back. "Stop it!" Tom shouted. He grabbed Buddy's collar, but the dog's muscles were rigid, trembling. Then Tom froze. From deep under the earth came a hollow sound. 3 soft knocks, like someone tapping on wood. Tom's breath caught. He lifted his flashlight, the beam trembling over the mound. The ground there seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. Buddy whimpered once, then stared up at Tom, eyes wide, tail low. Tom whispered, more to himself than to the dog, "Tell me that was just the wind." But the wind had stopped, and the sound came again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Chapter 2. The night wind and the voices beneath the ground. The storm had passed by morning, but the forest still smelled of rain and wet pine. Gray mist hung low between the trees like a veil, blurring the world into quiet shapes. Tom Harris stood on the porch with a cup of instant coffee, the steam curling against the cold air. Buddy sat beside him, tail curled neatly around his paws, watching the tree line as if expecting something to move there. Neither of them had slept much. The knocking from the night before still echoed in Tom's mind. 3 hollow beats that had come from deep within the earth. He'd told himself it was the ground settling after rain, or a branch falling into the old well, but deep down, he didn't believe it. He had worked too many years in silence to know when silence wasn't right. By mid-morning, he decided to fix the roof. He needed something to keep his hands busy, and his mind away from whatever had happened last night. The roof was a patchwork of warped shingles, moss, and rusted nails, a sad testament to decades of neglect. As he climbed the creaking ladder, Buddy barked softly from below, circling the base like a sentry. "Relax, boy. I'm not planning on dying today," Tom said, half smiling. The air up there was colder. Wine tugged at his jacket and carried the faint scent of metal, wet and sharp. He hammered in silence, the sound of each strike echoing across the clearing. But as he worked, another sound slipped beneath the rhythm of his hammer, a faint metallic tapping, irregular, distant, and deliberate. He stopped, listened. Tap, tap, tap. It came from somewhere beyond the trees. He looked down. Buddy was staring toward the back of the cabin, ears perked, hackles rising. Tom climbed down and followed the dog to the yard. The sound grew clearer, a dull, metallic ring followed by something that almost resembled a whisper. Not words exactly, but breath against the air. Buddy growled low, teeth bared, then began barking toward the well again. "Enough, Buddy," Tom said sharply, but the dog wouldn't stop. Finally, Tom grabbed the shovel leaning against the porch. "Fine, let's take a look." The ground around the buried well was soft from rain. Moss clung to old stones that once formed its rim. Tom pushed his shovel in and began to dig, the soil wet and heavy. Buddy pawed beside him, flinging dirt with surprising force for his age. After a few minutes, Tom's shovel struck something solid, a metallic clang, hollow and thin. He crouched, brushing aside the mud with his gloved hand. A rusty tin box, small enough to hold with one hand, emerged from the dirt. The top was dented, its hinges nearly fused shut. He pried it open with his pocket knife. Inside, wrapped in damp paper, was a faded photograph of a family, a man in uniform, a woman in a summer dress, 2 children with identical dimples. They stood in front of this very cabin, sunlight and happiness frozen in, time Beneath the photo lay a small brass key, corroded but intact. Tom's throat tightened. "The Carters," he whispered. Buddy sniffed the box, then looked up at Tom, whining softly. That evening, Tom drove into the nearby town of Clearwater, a small, wind-bitten place with a single gas station, a diner, and a post office that doubled as a general store. The bell above the diner door jingled as he entered. Behind the counter stood Martha Green, the owner, a woman in her late 60s with short silver hair and the solid frame of someone who had worked hard all her life. Her apron was flour-dusted, and she had that no-nonsense kindness unique to small-town women who had seen everything. "Coffee?" she asked. Already reaching for a cup. "Black, please," Tom said, sliding into a booth. She poured the coffee and eyed him curiously. "You're the man who bought the Carter place, ain't you?" "Yeah," he said. "Name's Tom Harris." Her brows knitted. "You staying out there by yourself?" "Just me and my dog." "Brave," she murmured, though it didn't sound like a compliment. "You know what they say about that place?" "I've heard some stories," he said carefully. "Don't put much stock in ghosts." Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Maybe you should. My husband used to work the logging roads out near there. He swore some nights he heard voices calling from the ground. Said it sounded like someone asking for help." Tom forced a small smile. "Ground doesn't talk, ma'am." "Maybe not," she said, straightening. "But grief does. It just needs a place to live." He didn't answer. Instead, he paid for his coffee, thanked her, and stepped out into the evening chill. By the time he got back to the cabin, the forest had gone black. A faint crescent moon hung above the treetops, and the wind had started again, threading through the pines in long, low moans. Inside, he set the tin box on the table and studied the key under lamplight. It wasn't an ordinary key. Its handle was round, engraved with a faint letter C. It looked like something from a chest or maybe a lockbox. Buddy lay near the door, head on his paws, eyes open. Every time the wind brushed the cabin, his ears twitched. "You feel it too, don't you?" Tom said quietly, "like this place remembers more than it should." He pocketed the key and went to bed, though sleep came in restless waves. Around midnight, the tapping returned, softer this time, but closer. It came from beneath the floorboards. Buddy shot up, growling, nose pressed to the wooden planks near the foot of the bed. Tom sat up, heart hammering. The sound repeated. Tap, 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 and then a faint scraping, as if something were dragging against wood. Tom grabbed his flashlight, flicked it on, and knelt by the spot. The boards there looked no different from the rest, except for a thin line of dirt that traced between the cracks, fresh and damp. He pressed his ear to the floor. Nothing. Then, faintly, a whisper. Not clear enough to understand, but unmistakably human. He jerked back, the flashlight slipping from his hand and rolling across the floor. The beam landed on Buddy's face. The dog wasn't barking anymore. He was staring at Tom, eyes wide, ears flat, tail tucked between his legs, terrified. And then, for the briefest moment, the floor beneath them shifted, a subtle rise like something breathing deep underground. Tom froze. The whisper came again, closer this time. It sounded like someone calling his name. Chapter 3. The Buried Story. Morning came cold and pale, with frost clinging to the cabin windows like thin lace. Tom Harris hadn't slept. The whisper from under the floorboards still echoed in his mind. That soft, broken voice, calling his name. He'd tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, the mind playing tricks after too many nights alone. But Buddy's terror had been real. Dogs didn't imagine things. They knew. By mid-morning, Tom was on the road again, the tin box and the brass key wrapped carefully in an old flannel shirt on the passenger seat. Buddy sat beside it, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. The old pickup rattled as it wound through the narrow forest road toward Riverton, the next town over, larger than Clearwater, with paved streets, red brick buildings, and a single library that looked older than the town itself. Inside the library, dust floated like slow snowflakes in the slanted light. The place smelled of paper and time. Behind the counter sat Eleanor Briggs, the librarian, a woman in her late 70s, small and sharp as a tack, her gray hair pinned neatly, her cardigan buttoned up to her throat. She had the kind of face that softened only when she smiled, though she rarely did. "Morning," Tom greeted, removing his cap. Eleanor peered at him over half-moon glasses. "You're not from around here." "No, ma'am. I'm staying out near the Carter place." Her eyebrows rose just slightly. That house still standing? Mostly, Tom said with a dry laugh. I'm looking for anything you might have on the Carters. Newspaper archives, old records. They lived out there before the flood. She studied him for a moment, then turned in her chair with surprising agility. Follow me. The archive room was narrow and dimly lit, lined with metal cabinets and microfilm readers. Eleanor moved with quiet efficiency, opening drawers and pulling files with practiced precision. Flood of 55 wiped half that valley off the map, she said. The Carter family, husband, wife, 2 children, their names were James, Helen, Peter, and little Anna. She handed Tom a brittle newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local veteran missing after flood devastates valley." The article described how James Carter, a former World War II sergeant, had gone missing days after a severe flood. His wife and children were found alive, but the family vanished soon afterward, leaving behind unpaid property taxes and unanswered questions. Tom felt the weight of the brass key in his pocket. Did they ever find out what happened to him? Eleanor shook her head slowly. A rumor said James Carter hid something before the flood. Money, gold, who knows? But the truth? He was a soldier with a bad case of guilt. Folks said he never came home from the war in his mind, even when his body did. Maybe he just walked away. Walked away from his family? Tom asked quietly. Her eyes softened for a moment. Sometimes the past takes people further than the road ever could. Tom thanked her and left. Outside, Buddy trotted close to his leg, tail wagging gently, grounding him back to the present. The afternoon light filtered gold through the trees as they drove back toward the cabin. Tom's thoughts churned. James Carter, a veteran, missing after the flood. The whispers. The key. Maybe all of it was connected. Back home, he unpacked his tools, a crowbar, a lantern, and an old spade. The sun was dipping behind the tree line, the sky bruising violet. Buddy paced anxiously near the back of the property where the half-buried well waited. The air was still, unnaturally so. Even the birds had gone quiet. All right, boy, Tom said, his voice steady though his hands trembled slightly. Let's see what you've been trying to tell me. He began to dig. The soil was damp and stubborn, releasing the scent of rot and rain. Buddy helped, clawing furiously at the softer earth. After an hour, they uncovered a layer of stones, rough, uneven, stacked deliberately to seal something beneath. Tom used the crowbar to pry one loose, then another. Beneath the third stone, the metal edge of a box gleamed faintly. Jesus, Tom whispered. It was a small iron chest, rusted shut, its hinges fused but still intact. Tom hauled it free, wiping mud from its surface. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock. It turned with a reluctant creak. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained fabric, were several bundles, a stack of old letters tied with string, a tarnished set of military medals, and a pouch that jingled when he lifted it. Gold coins, old and heavy, marked with U.S. mint dates from the 1940s. Tom sat back on his heels, breath clouding in the cold air. Buddy whined softly, nudging one of the medals with his nose. The first letter on top was addressed to "My dearest Helen." The paper was brittle, ink faded but legible. Tom unfolded it carefully and began to read. If you are reading this, then the storm has come sooner than I feared. I hid what I could before the flood reached us. The gold wasn't mine to keep. It belonged to men who won't forgive what I took. I did it for us, for the children, but I cannot bear the weight any longer. Tell them I love them. Tell them I tried to make it right. James. Tom stared at the letter until the words blurred. The air around him felt heavier now, as though the earth itself was listening. He could almost imagine the man, a soldier haunted by choices, desperate to protect his family, burying not just treasure, but guilt. He placed the letter back into the chest and stood. The forest had grown darker. The wind had died completely. Even Buddy stood motionless, ears cocked. Then, from the open hole where the chest had been buried, came a faint metallic clink. The sound of the key turning, though it lay still in Tom's hand. "Buddy," he whispered. The dog growled. Low. Something inside the hole shifted. A soft movement, like the earth exhaling. Then, unmistakably, a voice rose from the darkness, weary and broken. "I tried. I really did." Tom stumbled backward, the lantern shaking in his grasp. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the soil. Only silence remained. Buddy barked once, sharp and frightened. then pressed himself against Tom's leg. Tom stared into the open earth where the chest had been, heart pounding. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he had uncovered a secret or disturbed something that had never meant to be found. Chapter 4. The Confession in the Dark. The next morning broke under a pale sun, its light muted by fog that crept low through the valley. The ground still looked disturbed where Tom and Buddy had unearthed the chest, a scar of freshly turned soil marking the spot, like a wound that hadn't healed. Tom couldn't stop thinking about the voice, that broken whisper that had risen from the darkness. It hadn't sounded like madness or imagination. It had sounded tired, as if confessing one last thing it had carried for too long. Inside the cabin, Tom sat at the table with the iron chest open before him. The letters lay spread out like brittle autumn leaves, each written in a soldier's careful hand. Buddy rested by the stove, his eyes following Tom's every move. He had sensed something since the night before. He was quieter, more alert, as though the forest's silence had seeped into him, too. Tom read the next letter. It was dated August 3rd, 1954. Helen, I can't sleep anymore. The gold isn't worth the weight it puts on my soul. They said it was government surplus, that no one would miss it. But I know better. I was part of something I shouldn't have been. Edward took his share and left. I buried mine, but I'll never have peace until it's gone. When the rains stop, I'll make it right. Tom leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Edward. Another name, another ghost. He shuffled through the remaining letters and found one addressed simply to Peter. The writing was shakier, like it had been written in haste. If you're reading this, son, you're old enough to know I didn't run away. I went to fix what I broke. If I don't come back, tell your mother the truth. Tom folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the chest. He knew that kind of guilt. Not the kind that gnawed at you once, but the kind that stayed, becoming a companion. Years ago, when his wife fell ill, he had taken a construction job that promised quick money. He hadn't realized the company was cutting corners on safety. A month later, a young worker had died when scaffolding gave way. The company blamed the crew chief, Tom. They cleared his name legally, but not morally. The guilt had never left. He looked down at the letters again, feeling the strange pull of kinship across time. James Carter had tried to fix what he had broken too, and died before he could. By late afternoon, Tom decided to find out if anyone from the Carter family was still alive. The only clue he had was the town of Riverton and the family names Eleanor had given him: Helen, Peter, Anna. He called the county clerk's office from the payphone outside the diner in Clearwater. The man who answered was Raymond Ellis, the county records officer, mid-50s, gruff-voiced, with a tone that suggested he'd rather be fishing. Carter family, he said, flipping through what sounded like old files. James Carter, deceased 1955, wife Helen remarried. Helen Whitmore, died in 98. They had 2 kids, Peter and Anna. Peter moved to Oregon sometime in the 70s. No record of Anna after 1960. Oregon, Tom repeated. Any address? Raymond snorted. This isn't the FBI, friend. Closest thing you'll get is an old forwarding note from a pension form. Try Grant's Pass. Appreciate it, Tom said. Back at the cabin, Tom packed the letters, medals, and the gold pouch into a small canvas bag. The air outside was unnervingly still again. Even the pines seemed to listen. Buddy followed him, tail low, ears flicking at every rustle. As dusk fell, Tom sat on the porch, the chest now buried again, not out of fear, but out of respect. He lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years, and watched the smoke drift into the night. He spoke softly, not sure to whom. I'll find them, James. I'll make it right for you. Buddy raised his head, as if understanding, and rested it on Tom's knee. Later that night, Tom dreamed he was back at the dig site. The soil was loose beneath his boots. He heard water rushing, thunder rolling in the distance. Then he saw a figure standing by the well, a man in a soldier's jacket, face hidden beneath shadow. The man raised his hand slowly, pointing toward the forest. Tom woke with a start. The lamp flickered beside his bed. Buddy was sitting upright, staring at the window. Outside, a faint light moved between the trees. Not the pale shimmer of moonlight, but something steadier, deliberate. A lantern, perhaps, or a torch. Tom grabbed his jacket and flashlight, stepping out into the cold night. The light bobbed deeper among the trees, too smooth to be a trick of the eye. Buddy followed, silent now, paws barely making a sound on the wet ground. Hello? Tom called. His voice was swallowed by the forest. No reply. The light flickered once, then vanished. Tom scanned the darkness, the beam of his flashlight cutting across trunks slick with dew. Nothing. Only the sigh of the wind returning, faint and steady. He turned back toward the cabin. That was when he saw them. Footprints. Fresh, deep, leading away from the old well and into the woods. Boots, size of a grown man's. Tom crouched, tracing the outline with his hand. The soil was cold and damp, but unmistakably pressed within the last hour. He looked at Buddy, whose hackles rose again. The forest rustled once, softly, like someone stepping back into the dark. Chapter 5. The light beyond the pines. Dawn arrived quietly over the Idaho hills, spreading soft amber light through the forest like a slow exhale. Tom stood at the edge of the clearing, coffee mug in hand, staring at the trail that led into the woods. The footprints from last night were gone, erased by the wind or by something else that didn't leave traces. Buddy stood beside him, ears flicking, tail calm now, as if whatever presence had lingered had finally moved on. 2 weeks had passed since Tom mailed the letters, medals, and a copy of the confession to an address he'd found in Grants Pass, Oregon, the last known residence of Peter Carter. He hadn't expected a response. Some stories, he'd learned, stayed buried because the living didn't want to reopen the pain of the dead. But that morning, the mail truck rumbled up the dirt road, kicking dust into the sunlight. The driver handed him a small, weathered envelope. The handwriting was shaky, but deliberate, from Peter Carter. Inside was a single letter. Mr. Harris, I don't know how to thank you. For 70 years, our family wondered what happened to my father. My mother died thinking he had abandoned us. To know now that he tried to make things right, that he wasn't a coward, means more than I can say. I'm an old man now, but my daughter and I would like to meet you, to see the place where he lived. We'll come by the end of the month. Tom folded the letter slowly, feeling something loosen in his chest. Buddy leaned against his leg as if sensing the weight of what had just lifted. The last week of October arrived cold and bright. A light snow had fallen the night before, frosting the pines in white. Around noon, a gray Subaru wound its way up the dirt road. From it stepped Peter Carter, a man in his early 80s with the kind of presence that age didn't diminish. Tall but slightly stooped, his hair silver, his hands still steady despite time. Beside him walked Emily Carter, his granddaughter, mid-30s, auburn hair pulled into a low braid, eyes the same shade of blue as the winter sky. Tom met them at the porch. Peter extended a trembling hand. Mr. Harris, you have no idea what this means to us. Tom shook it firmly. You don't owe me thanks, sir. I just found what was already waiting to be found. They spent the afternoon walking the property. Peter moved slowly but deliberately, pausing often to touch the old fence posts or look toward the hills. When they reached the well, he stood silent for a long time, snowflakes catching in his white hair. This is where you found the chest? Emily asked softly. Tom nodded. Buried deep under the stones. Your grandfather's handwriting was still clear, like he'd written it yesterday. Peter smiled faintly. He always said his words would outlive him. His gaze dropped to the ground. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good man. I wish I'd known. Buddy trotted up then, brushing sill against Peter's leg, tail wagging. The old man chuckled, his voice breaking with emotion. Good boy, he whispered, kneeling with effort to scratch Buddy behind the ears. They stayed until sunset. Before leaving, Emily turned to Tom. We've talked about it, she said. We don't want the land. It belongs to you. You gave our family peace. That's worth more than anything. Peter nodded in agreement. Keep it, Mr. Harris. Build something good here. My father would have liked that. Tom stood speechless, the winter air catching in his throat. He shook Peter's hand again, this time holding it a little longer. Thank you, he said quietly. That night, after the Carters drove away, Tom sat on the porch with Buddy. The forest was hushed beneath a canopy of stars. He could still see the faint tire tracks in the snow, leading back down the mountain, proof that the living could sometimes finish what the dead began. Weeks turned into months. Tom poured his savings into repairing the old house. New windows, a stable roof, fresh white paint. But it wasn't just a home anymore. With the help of the local vet and a few neighbors from Clearwater, he turned the property into a shelter for abandoned animals. He named it Whispering Pines Shelter. By spring, the barn echoed not with silence, but with barks, purrs, and laughter from volunteers who came to help. Tom's weathered hands found purpose again, hammering, feeding, caring. Buddy, now slower but dignified, became the shelter's gentle guardian, watching over the newcomers with patient eyes. Sometimes, visitors would ask why Tom had built the shelter here, of all places. He'd smile, glance toward the swaying pines, and say, "Because this land needed peace as much as they do." On quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the trees, it carried a sound like soft voices, not mournful, but calm, as if the forest itself was exhaling relief. Tom often paused then, looking toward the old well now sealed with a circle of wildflowers. One evening, Emily Carter returned alone, bringing a carved wooden sign. She had sanded it herself, her hands still stained with varnish. It read, "In memory of Sergeant James Carter, 1909 to 1955. He sought redemption and found it." Tom mounted the sign at the edge of the property. The last rays of sunset caught the letters, glowing gold. That night, as he closed up the shelter, Buddy barked softly at the tree line. Tom followed his gaze. And there, between the pines, a faint light flickered once. A man's silhouette, faint, standing tall in the snow, hand lifted as if in salute. Tom smiled. "You're welcome, James." The light faded. The forest fell silent again, peaceful and whole. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, in the rustle of pine trees, in the loyalty of an old dog, in a stranger's act of kindness that mends what was once broken. Tom never saw himself as a holy man, yet somewhere between the guilt he carried and the peace he found, he understood something sacred. God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes, he sends them with paws, muddy boots, and tired hands that still choose to do what's right. The Whispering Pines shelter became more than a refuge for lost animals. It became proof that redemption is real, that love, once buried under years of silence, can rise again like dawn after a long night. Every bark, every meow, every life saved was a quiet prayer answered. And maybe that's the true miracle, not gold or treasure, but the grace to begin again. The reminder that no matter how far we've wandered, God still finds a way to call us home through the most unexpected voices, even the faithful bark of a dog who never stopped believing. So tonight, take a moment to thank God for the small miracles in your life, the warmth of a loyal friend, the beauty of forgiveness, the courage to keep going. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope. Leave a comment below. Tell us about your miracle or how an animal once changed your life. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories of faith, love, and redemption, where every creature and every heart deserves a second chance. May God bless you, keep you, and whisper peace into your soul, just as he did for Tom, Buddy, and all who still believe that light can bloom even in forgotten places.